I'll join palms and repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Keeping the palms joined. Put the palms down. All right, good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all here. Thanks for showing up. What a great opportunity we have every day to practice. I mean, without all the conflict and chaos going on around us, we'd have nothing to work on. I'm sure that's your exact same sentiment when all the conflict and chaos is going on, right? You just say, thankfully, we have something to work on now. Some of you know over the years, we've had her speak many times. She's since retired after being a professor at USD for probably 30 years, but Karmalekshi Somo is a Tibetan Buddhist nun, and she taught for us on and off for probably 12 years. And, she shared a story one night where she was talking about a teacher of hers who, anytime that any problems would arise, any conflict would occur, the person would just say, either to herself or out loud, it depended upon the setting, but she would just say, blessings, 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 during every conflict. You can all do that, right? Every time a conflict arises, just see it as a blessing. But what does that actually mean? Because when a conflict arises, how do we feel? How do you feel when conflicts arise? Frustrated. What else? Nervous, anxious, confused, angry. So when we feel frustrated, nervous, confused, anxious, and angry, how likely are we to see it as a blessing? Not much. So now you have a new practice. To just see each conflict as a blessing. And at that moment of anxiety or nerves or anger or frustration or whatever it is that's arising, just pause for a moment and see it as an opportunity to practice. Because what are you getting to learn about in the moment of conflict?
Patience.
Patience, and specifically whom? Yourself. I get it, I know we all just want to blame everybody else for every problem in the world, but it's just possible that if we stop and reflect on our role in each situation, maybe the situation can drastically shift. At the very least, maybe our view of the current situation can drastically shift. And if we drastically shift the view, then maybe that feeling of anger, anxiety, sadness, depression, whatever it might be, the frustration, if we shift our view of a situation, then maybe the emotions shift. And if our emotions shift, how do we tend to feel? Better. See how easy that was? You can all go home now. Thank you for showing up. So, I'm just kidding. I mean, unless you want to go home, you're fine. All right, so we're going to start with a meditation practice. For those who are joining virtually, thanks for showing up as well. There's a chat box somewhere on your screen. Feel free to say hello as you are. Chime in and get to questions. You can share them there as well. So for those who are maybe sitting for the first time, a couple things to tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you, right? You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is it working or not working? Are you doing it right? Are you doing it wrong? We're just going to sit, we're going to breathe. All right, you'll hear sounds inside, sounds outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos. This practice of learning to get quiet and still within all of the chaos. If you are brand new, you're not trying to think nothing. You're not trying to empty your mind. Your mind's going to keep racing. I'll say things periodically to remind you to come back to the present moment, or simply wake you up because you've fallen asleep. Nothing wrong with sleep, but you didn't come all this way and pay all this money to fall asleep. So feel free to stay awake. Posture, you want to be comfortable. If you're on a cushion, often it helps side into the front third, pushing the stomach forward. Allows the back to straighten, shoulders are relaxed. Hands can be on the knees or on the lap, whatever's comfortable. If you're on a bench or chair, however you're seated, also just trying to sit up straight. If you need to move during meditation, simply move. Movement doesn't make you a bad meditator, just means your leg hurts. And will guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. Most important, do not expect anything. We're just going to sit and breathe. And starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed, whatever's comfortable. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice Observing sensation of breath. Expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. You turn attention, focus to the breath. Where's your mind? Lost in thought. Return to breath. letting go of expectations, letting go of judgments from the practice. Just sitting, breathing. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, follow breath out. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. And no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And slowly opening the eyes. Slowly beginning to move. And most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize whatever you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It's everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada. Means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakening. He was a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. What that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless where you come from or what you believe in or where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens. More reactions. That's it. This practice is simply learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to every other 20-minute period of your day. So all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful. Whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. This practice is not easy. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape, as often people think it is. It's direct perception into the present moment and learning to be with life as it arises. If your life is a crazy, hectic, stressed out mess, this isn't going to fix that. It helps you become aware of what's going on in your life so you can then make changes. So your life isn't such a mess. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. Sitting, breathing, becoming aware of what you think, what you say, and what you do in every moment. And that's all. It is the daily practice of being aware of your karma, your action. What you think, what you say, and what you do, what you bring into the world. And the practice of slowing down creates space and an opportunity for us to sit with the nature of our own minds. Suffering only exists because of the nature of your own mind. This is what the Buddha teaches us very clearly. All the people and places and things around us that we often refer to and consider the cause of all of our suffering and all the problems. It starts with your mind. It does not mean that there are not things in this world that are disgusting and horrific that should change. But it means the first step is to get to know the nature of your mind and work on changing that. First, embrace it, accept it, see the madness for what it is, your own mind, and learn to be okay with it. And then work from there. But this practice is like a mirror. It's just an opportunity to look back at ourselves. And again, that's why it's a practice. It's not 6 weeks and you're done. It's not 3 months and all of a sudden you're ready for the next thing. It's just day in and day out. That's all. So with that, I'll pause. For me, I really just prefer to respond to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything that's on your mind. And again, for those joining virtually, welcome. Glad you're here. As you are, there's a chat box on your screen, so feel free to, if you have any questions, to share them there. I'll do my best to respond. And we'll use the rest of our time this evening for your thoughts or questions.
I'm brand new to this. What would be a good jumping off point for like the Eightfold Path?
So the question, I repeat them pretty much for one, to make sure I heard it and understood it, and then also for those virtually. But your question is, you're brand new, and what would be a good jumping off point for the Eightfold Path? Yeah. So let me just give it a little bit of context for anyone else here who might be brand new as well. The first thing the Buddha taught after he awakened is the Four Noble Truths, which led into the Eightfold Path. And if you're already asking about the Eightfold Path, that means you probably read the Four Noble Truths. And you're like, I got it, I'm good, I'm ready for the Eightfold Path, right? My first response was going to be I wouldn't jump anywhere. I would just sit down and shut up and be with it for about 12 years. But I decided not to give you that answer and give you a different answer. But I at least wanted to express what my thought was, So backing up to the Four Noble Truths, and I'll sum this up in 2 minutes. The first thing the Buddha said is life is dukkha, suffering. Doesn't mean all of life sucks. Doesn't mean everything in your life is traumatic and life-threatening and death and loss. There's also, your coffee wasn't made the right way, the traffic isn't how you want it to be, customer service isn't helping you how you'd like it to go. This is also dukkha. You don't like mayonnaise, you got mayonnaise on your sandwich, right? All these things we experience every day. So it doesn't mean that all of life sucks. It just means we're going to experience suffering a lot in our lives. And if you're here on a Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock, you probably figured that out by now, right? So that's the first thing he said. Second one is the cause, referred to as the three poisons: greed, anger, ignorance. We overcome greed with generosity. We overcome anger with compassion. We overcome ignorance with wisdom. This is the practice. The third is the ending of suffering, nirvana, liberation, freedom from suffering. Right? The fourth is the Eightfold Path. Having correct views, thought, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration. Everything I just said is on Google, all for free. And if you stay on the first 2 Google search pages, you're good to go. And I actually suggest reading like 50 different versions of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, because they will highlight different aspects of them. When you get into like the 5th page of the Google search, I would stop there. But your question very specifically about where do you jump into the Eightfold Path? You don't jump into it. And I get it, it's just a word choice with the question. You sit with it for a very long time. Before you even get to the Eightfold Path, I suggest sitting with the second noble truth, which is the cause of our suffering: greed, anger, and ignorance. Do you ever get greedy? I'm confirming the head went this way for those of you not looking at him. You ever get angry? You ever ignorant? And ignorant just means ignoring true nature of reality, which in essence is pretty much every moment of our entire lives, right? The Buddha talked about the true nature of reality and then our perception of reality, 2 different things. So we roam around all day long thinking that what we see is correct. But how can that be? Because we all look at the same thing and we see it completely differently. So who's right? Who's wrong? It's different perceptions of reality. So this is the ignorance. The first thing before you even begin to get into the Eightfold Path is ask yourself, and I would do this, and I mean this very seriously, especially this is day 1 for you, right? I would spend the next year, not even kidding, I would spend the next year every day just noticing when your greed arises, when your anger arises, and when your ignorance arises. I would start there. Because the one thing about the Eightfold Path, you look at Buddhism, you got the Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, 6 paramitas, 5 precepts, you got all these numbers. And many of them don't really matter what order you go in. The Eightfold Path does. It starts with the correct view. Now, if your view is that, and what's your name? Adam. If your view, Adam, is like, Adam's good, I got this shit figured out, then you're not even past the first step on the Eightfold Path. The first step is to understand the depth of Adam's greed, anger, and ignorance. So you can begin to pull yourself out of thinking that you actually know the right way. One of my favorite Buddhist expressions is, you can't use the unenlightened mind to figure out enlightened teachings. We must practice. And to practice, we must become aware. To me, that's the first step on the Eightfold Path. The awareness of our greed, anger, and ignorance. Does that make sense? Yeah. very often, and believe me, I've heard this question 1,000 times, the people who are new to this stuff will pick up Buddhist books, will Google stuff, and we're like, okay, Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, I got it, and what's next? A lot of the greatest Buddhist scholars and masters and teachers out there for 2,000 years have said the entire body of the Buddhist teachings is in the Four Noble Truths. So memorizing these things, being able to recite them, means nothing. Can you practice them? Can you recognize your greed, anger, and ignorance in every single moment that we are awake? So that's where I'd start. Yeah, for sure. Thank you. What else? There's a question here that says, is there any counting or process of breathing like 4, 7, 8 to help to concentrate and go back on track if mind keeps wandering? So I'll say this, if 1,000 people lead you in meditation, they'll lead you 1,000 different ways, and everyone's different. If anyone tells you that's the way and the only way, and then they ask you for a bunch of money, I'd probably get up and run. Other than that, just find a practice that works for you. With the counting, very specifically within the Zen practice, the Buddhist teachings on sensation of breath is just the awareness. If you're breathing in, taking a short breath, know you're breathing in and taking a short breath. If you're breathing out, taking a long breath, know you're breathing out and taking a long breath. So it's an awareness of sensation of breath. One practice you can absolutely use is the counting. I'm not sure about the 4, 7, 8. I mean, I guess you could breathe in, breathe out, count 4, breathe in, breathe out, count 7, breathe in, breathe out, count 8. And ultimately, that's no different than going 1 through 10. 1 through 10 is just a construct that we've set up. But I would suggest, if you're going to use a counting method, breath in, breath out, count 1. Breath in, breath out, count 2. Breath in, breath out, count 3. You can do that 1 to 10, 10 to 1. The initial way I was trained was that 1 through 10, 10 to 1, then you go 1 to 5, 5 to 1, then you do it all backwards, then you see it being drawn, the number is 1, the number 2, 1 to 10, 1 to 5, backwards, then you imagine the numbers expanding. So you can, do all kinds of trainings to help the mind stay focused on the present moment, absolutely. But I would just find what works for you as opposed to one method that it's like this universal way that everybody should do. So hopefully that's helpful. Yeah.
Can you talk about how the relationship between the Hindu religion and Buddhism, like how do they?
Yeah. How do they do it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question around, can I talk about the relationship between the Hindu religion and practice and Buddhism? Yes and no. It's going to be very brief because I've never studied Buddhist practice. I've never studied Hindu practice, Hindu teachings. All I can say, again, for anyone who might not know, is that the Buddha was Hindu. He was born and raised Hindu. It was his teaching. It was his way of life. He grew up believing in Hindu gods and goddesses, just like, for the most part, everybody else he was around. Obviously, when he was growing up, Buddhism didn't exist. It's an interesting, very similar practice. And again, this is only what I know from very surface level of listening to enough teachers over the years, more scholars than anything, that there are a lot of similarities. But not having studied or practiced Hindu stuff, there's not much I can say on it. Again, other than the Buddha was Hindu. But the one major difference is that the Hindu teachings talked about, they called him Atman, which was like a soul that continued on, because again, they believed in rebirth, reincarnation, continuation of consciousness, whatever you want to call it, depending on the belief or religion or practice. But they believed that there was an Atman that continued on, that your soul continued on. Where the Buddha came in and said, no, there is no Atman, there is no soul. There's simply what's called a Laya Vijnana, which is a storehouse of consciousness. There's a collection of all of your karma that will continue on endlessly. But it's not yours. Because, of course, if we ponder this from our existing moment, I'm like, okay, well, these are Jeff's thoughts. And what are Jeff's thoughts going forward? Well, 300 years ago, who was Jeff? 100 years ago, who was Jeff? 100 years from now, who is Jeff? In this moment, who is Jeff? These are just labels and names we give physical form. Consciousness is formless and endless. So that's about all I got on that. Yeah.
Are you Jeff?
Am I?
That's a cool name.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, since you said it's a cool name, then I'll own it. Yeah. But I mean that very seriously about the constructs. Is it like, am I Jeff? I mean, I guess if everybody called me Jeff, I'm Jeff. But if all of a sudden you all started calling me, I don't know, Greg. And all of you were like, that's Greg, that's Greg, that's Greg. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll be Greg. Like, does that change anything? Was that a yeah meaning like a no? Or
No, I just meant I understand.
Yeah, that's what I thought you meant, yeah. It doesn't change anything. So these are just, everything in our lives is just a construct that we put on something. We put it in a box, we label it, and we say, this is the way. You know, it kind of goes back to my comment earlier to, was it Adam?
Yes.
Yeah, about, I was going to say this before, but Thich Nhat Hanh, to me, one of the greatest teachings is he said nirvana is freedom from views. Liberation from, freedom from suffering is freedom from views. And so our entire lives, we create constructs and views around what we think is accurate and correct. And then we spend our whole lives defending those views. And Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Zen master, said, freedom from views. And all views are wrong, is what he said. How many of you roam around all day long thinking your views are wrong? So, yeah.
Can you go over the concept of non-self and how it relates to practice? Question to answer there.
Yeah. It's actually an easy question to answer. The question was, can I go over the concept of non-self and how it relates to practice? The reason it's an easy question to answer, because the answer is no. I cannot. Who is going to go over the concept of non-self? Greg? Jeff? I mean, you look confused. There we go. Now that you're in a mass state of confusion, you're starting to understand the concept of non-self. I know you're trying to get out of state of confusion, but maybe the state of confusion is better. What do you want to be? Clear and know something? And then you can check it off and say, I know. Stay confused, my friend. That's easy. Well, there you go. I'll give you a taste of a better answer that might sit differently. The reason I always go there with the non-self emptiness questions is, so Subhuti, one of the Buddha's wisest disciples, the Buddha asked him to give a discourse on emptiness, right? The emptiness teachings. And this is really embedded with non-self, non-duality. It's called the Prajnaparamita Sutras, Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, Diamond Sutra, Heart Sutra, etc. And Subhuti sat down to give a discourse on emptiness, said nothing. And the Buddha said, good job, good job. So when people ask me questions about emptiness, non-self, who's going to sit here and give a talk on non-self? So you say, oh, Jeff taught me about non-self. Who learned? I learned about non-self. Whose self is even learning about non-self? Still confused, right? Great.
It's making more sense.
Making more sense. To me, the most important piece of understanding non-self is to understand, first and foremost, you're never going to understand. Second is to understand that whatever you think is non-self is not non-self. And third, coming back to right view, the first step in the Eightfold Path is to understand that your entire life, you see things from your view, attached to your sense of what? Self. When you woke up this morning, did you have breakfast? That was like a simple question. I'm not trying to confuse you. When you woke up this morning, did you have breakfast? No? Let's try again. When you woke up this morning, did you have breakfast?
Yes.
Prior to having breakfast, did you ask yourself or say to yourself, I'm hungry? In that moment of saying I'm hungry and then proceeding to get breakfast, Did you ask if the rest of the world was hungry? Did you ask anyone in your household if they were hungry? Did you ask if your dog or cat was hungry? Or were you just like, I'm hungry, I need to eat? And then after that, once we've satisfied our hunger, then we're like, okay, now I can go save the world and feed everybody else. Look at me, I'm such a good Buddhist. I understand non-self, I'm going to help all of you. Nonsense. Spend a long time identifying your attachments to your sense of self. How much of your day revolves around you? And if you can decrease this, then you get closer to practicing non-self. But you cannot intellectually conceptualize non-self, I don't feel, because you're using the self to do that. Gotcha.
I understand, I guess, what that word means literally, as in we are just in this physical form, but inside our soul and our mind is that non-self that just makes the universe and things that we can't accept.
No, you don't understand, because it's not inside our soul and our mind. There is no self to be inside any self. Stay confused. You're trying to answer non-self. It's like years ago, a kid wanted a definition of wisdom, so he busted out the dictionary. He's like, this is wisdom. Why? Because like Webster said it? Who's Webster anyways? I don't need to listen now, but, right? Do not try to understand. As soon as somebody says to me, I understand intellectually non-self, that means they do not at all understand intellectually non-self. And I'm just, giving you shit because I think you can take it, right? But to say I understand non-self means you don't understand non-self intellectually or conceptually or metaphorically or figuratively or literally or in any way, shape, or form. There is no self to understand non-self. You ever read the Heart Sutra?
I've heard of it, but
Okay. When you go back home, Google it, right? Pull up any one of the translations. Four Noble Truths, right? We all know Buddhist teachings. I just said life, suffering, cause, right? Ending, and the path. Those are the Four Noble Truths. The Heart Sutra says there is no suffering, there is no cause of suffering, there is no cessation of suffering, and there is no path. There is no wisdom or any attainment. With nothing to attain, bodhisattvas relying on prajnaparami to perfection of wisdom, attain anuttara samyak sambodhi, supreme ultimate enlightenment. That should have been my response to the next step on the Eightfold Path, is read the Heart Sutra. There is no next step to take. All right, what else? Questions? Yeah. Wait, go to the back first, then we'll go here. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm just curious, when the Dalai Lama dies and they're looking for a new Dalai Lama, are they looking for, like when they're trying to pick a new Dalai Lama, are they trying to find a recreation of the first Buddha that is transcended and gone through multiple people, or is that the principles that they're trying to find?
Man, I love the Dharma Bum Temple, because we can go from this to like searching for the Dalai Lama. No, all great questions, right? So your question, just to paraphrase, is what you're trying to understand is when the Dalai Lama dies, who are they looking for, and are they looking for the first Buddha, right? That's in essence, your question.
Yeah.
So a couple things. One, the beauty of this holiness, the Dalai Lama currently, is he's made it very clear, as bodhisattvas do, they in essence control their rebirth. He's made it very clear that when he dies, he ain't coming back. So nowhere to search for him. I'll still answer your question, but I just wanted to point that out since you referenced the Dalai Lama, right? He's made it very clear when he's done, he's done. There will be no rebirth. So when some country shows up and says, here's our next Dalai Lama, that ain't it, right? But the way that works, and I kind of touched on this earlier with the rebirth, reincarnation, again, to put it into context, at the time of the Buddha, just about everybody there believed in rebirth or reincarnation. So if you told somebody 2,500 years ago in India that you had one life and then you were going to heaven or hell, they would have thought you were cuckoo, right? Fast forward to today, you go up to most Western people and tell them that you're going to be reborn, they think you're a little nuts. So you have to understand when you explore Buddhist teachings, for everybody, that we're looking at these teachings through the lens of somebody who they all believed in rebirth. The Buddha wasn't teaching this stuff so you could all be peaceful and happy. I hate to break it to you. I know you're all here because you want to have less stress. You know, you want all your stuff to go your way. But the Buddha wanted people to be free from suffering. And at that time in India, there was only one way to be free from suffering. And that was what? To stopping rebirth. How many of you came here tonight because you wanted to make sure you were no longer reborn? Didn't happen, right? But that's what he was teaching. So with this concept of rebirth, when the Dalai Lama dies, and in Tibetan Buddhism, which is also the least I've studied of Buddhist practice, but general knowledge is that when you die, your consciousness goes into what they call the Bardo state, very grand in Buddhist teachings. And at some point over a 49-day period, that consciousness will be reborn into physical form, right? So you have sperm, you have egg, you have consciousness. It all comes together at some point over a 49-day period, and you have life, okay? Now, in Tibetan Buddhism, you have what they refer to as reincarnation, where they do believe, a little similar to my knowledge of kind of this soul that continues on, they do believe that an individual is reincarnated and continues on. So they would do kinds of tests. They show this stuff in movies, but you know, you'll see like a child that they've identified that they might think is the next, and not just the Dalai Lama, they do this with all lamas or many lamas, right? Where they want to see if this is a reincarnation of the great, this lama. And so they'll show this child like 20 bowls, like food bowls, 20 pairs of glasses, 20 walking sticks. They'll ask them all kinds of questions that this little 7-year-old child knows exactly which one was theirs. So there's, obviously I have not been exposed to exactly how they find the Dalai Lamas of past, but they go through a whole series of tests like that to identify that yes, and confirm this Dalai Lama is the rebirth. But again, even if you look at the holiness Dalai Lama right now, which I think he's the 14th, he's the reincarnation of not the 13th, but a prior Dalai Lama. I think, I'm not even going to throw a number out there, but a previous one. Where does that all begin? You mentioned, are they looking for the first Buddha? No. The Dalai Lama is the literal reincarnation initially from the Bodhisattva Kuan Yin. Her name means hearer of the world's cries. So she is the compassion body. She hears all the suffering in the world and pours out compassion. That's why she sits here as our main statue. The endless body of compassion. Dalai Lama's name means ocean of wisdom. That's a cool name. Nothing wrong with Jeff and Greg, but ocean of wisdom would be cool. I'm gonna have to talk to my parents about that. So does that help put it into context? There's a lot there, but they're not looking for like the first Buddha. Yeah. There was a great play years ago I went to and with my parents, and it was called, I think, The Eldest Boy or something like that. And it was a story about these two Tibetan monks, and they show up at like some house in like Iowa or something like that. And there's this nice little Midwestern family with like a little 8-year-old boy, and they show up and they're like, your son is the reincarnation of our great master Lama so-and-so. And so it's all about these two monks like trying to take this boy because they think he's the reincarnation of their great master. So different times, my friends. We're worried that our, socks match our belts and shoes. We're in a different world now. What else? Sorry, you had a question over here.
I was going to ask, I heard your answer on non-self.
Yeah.
And my question is going to be, what would you say to someone who hears non-self and has never heard that word before?
Yeah.
So what would you say to them?
Oh, I would answer it so differently.
Well, I'm asking because, for instance, like my grandma said the first time, she was for what's non-self, and when we walk out of here, I can't answer that.
Yeah.
So I would ask, what would you say to someone who's never heard that?
Thank you for asking that question that way. Now, finally, a smile. So, non-self means that we exist, right? I'm here. My parents called me Jeff. That's the name I was given. I physically exist, right? Non-self often gets confused as that we don't exist. We are here. We are just here completely different from how we perceive ourselves, right? So I grew up really angry and depressed. So I created a mind of my own that viewed me as this angry, depressed person. And I identified that as myself. Who are you? I'm an angry, depressed kid who likes baseball, right? So I called myself Jeff, angry, depressed, who likes baseball. For me, when I first learned the practice of non-self, I very quickly wanted to completely understand what non-self was so I could prove to myself and everybody else that I understood non-self. Once I stopped trying to understand it and started looking at the story about myself that I'm attached to is not me. And the story that I look at and tell myself about everybody else is not them. My life began to drastically change. For me, the practice of non-self is to understand that the way I perceive myself and the way I perceive every other human, animal, interaction is completely different from who and how they are, right? So this is your grandma sitting right next to you there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? What's grandma's name?
Shirley.
Shirley. So
Love Charlie.
Charlie? Charlie.
I prefer Charlie.
All right, then I'll call you Charlie, right? So I've never met Charlie, I've never seen Charlie, but as soon as I start to talk about Charlie, I begin to form what? Opinions, thoughts, ideas. I mean, at this point, you seem pretty pleasant, so we're good, right? But if I started to ask you your whole life story, and then you tell me you ever done one thing wrong in your life? No, right on.
No,
Right.
okay.
It's maybe one, like 20 years ago. So as you start to tell me things about you, then I start to add on opinions, add on thoughts. As I get to know you more, I start to change my thoughts and views and opinions. Are any of those right? Are any of those who you are? No, those are just things you've done, experiences you've had, places you've been, stuff you've lived. But we look at someone and we look at ourselves and we lock them into a story.
Yeah.
And we think that story is correct. Does that help? Can you retell that to
Yeah.
Grandma Charlie?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
very helpful, I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, I can.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Good stuff.
Thank you. Thank you.
What else? Thoughts, questions? We'll do one more or so before we wrap up. Yeah.
Can you talk about the importance of detachment?
I can talk about, so the question is, can I talk about the importance of detachment? The first important thing in talking about detachment is to no longer call it detachment, but to call it non-attachment. Just semantics, just words, but very different meanings, right? For me, when I hear the word detach, it sounds like cutting off, as if you're severing something from, right? And that is not at all what non-attachment is. And I always start there because very often, also for people who would be brand new, looking at non-self, looking at non-attachment, very often these things might sound as if, well, nothing matters, you don't care, non-attachment. So many years ago said to me, they were here from another religious group and they were learning about Buddhism, high school students. And as they often do, they come here to learn about, Buddhist practice. And this group of high school students, again, coming from another religion, their high school teacher told them that Buddhists don't love their parents because they're not allowed to attach to them. I said, all right, children, let's sit down and have a talk here, right? Non-attachment is actually endless love and compassion. Have you ever loved anyone? Person, parent, child, partner? Yep. Huh? Several, right? In these several people that you have loved, have you ever tried to control them? Have you ever tried to manipulate them? Have you ever tried to hope that they do things exactly how you want? And if you say no to all of that, you're just a liar. Right? So the reality is, unless you're the one enlightened person in the room, when we love people, because we're unenlightened folks, we're nice, we do our best, but we still have a sense of, we're not all there yet. So we want people to be a certain way. Right? You ever been on a first date?
Yes.
And on that first date, you disclose everything about yourself? No. And then 3 years later, you're like, oh wait, you know what, honey, I forgot to tell you about this. You know? So that's kind of our lives in relationship and in love. Non-attachment means you just love everyone for who they are and how they are. And you're not trying to control them, you're not trying to change them, you're not trying to fix them, you're not trying to cut them off. Right? It's a great example of parents with children, especially, you know, younger and as they get older, kind of into the teenage years, because when they become teenagers, no matter how much you tell them what to do you think they're going to listen? You're actually fooling yourself if you're telling yourself, yes, my children are going to listen to me. All you have to do is ask yourself, did you listen? Usually the quickest way to answer that question, right? So as they become teenagers, being a parent who's non-attached means you're going to love them endlessly. And you're going to guide them with all the love in the world that you can and all the hopeful wisdom and compassion. And then the moment they walk out that door and the car engine starts and they drive off, they're on their own. And they're going to make their choices and their decisions. And you're going to disagree with a lot of them. But you're going to love them regardless. Even if you disagree with them. Even if you continue to try to teach them. Right? So non-attachment, so many years ago, put their hands together and said, this is non-attachment. Crossing over is kind of that control. So non-attached, endless love. That make sense? Yeah. Don't cut things out. Often people think Buddhism is like removing, like you don't care, nothing matters. Everything matters in Buddhist practice. Everything. Every single thought, every word, every action matters. Buddhist practice is not nothing matters. I'm going to sit under a tree and just watch the world go by. No, the world is on fire. You should get up and do shit to make it better. You know? Yeah. And the last one here.
What is the term satsang mean? Is that Buddhist?
Satsang is, it's not Buddhist. I think it's like some sort of, anyone here know, some sort of practice, maybe coming from a Hindu yogic tradition, maybe a community. I could
I've just
Google
heard
it.
it a lot. I don't know what it
Yeah,
means.
satsang maybe is, do you know?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
somebody just Google it before we close. Thank you. But yeah, I think it's either, might even have something to do with chanting or singing or yoga or Hindu
It's
practice.
Hindu.
Hindu, right? Yeah.
It's Hindu and it's usually chanting.
There you go.
Thank
Hindu and chanting.
You're welcome.
Yeah. All right. Anything else before we close? Cool. So we're joined palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all be at peace and free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to those who need it most. All right, before you head out, our Dharma Bum host John will come up. Just a few quick announcements before you head out. And Patricia, I'm just now seeing your question on inner practice and paying attention, so I'll address that next time. I'm sorry.
Hello, everyone. I'm tonight's host, John. We opened the Dharma Bum Temple 17 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those who lead are not nuns, monks, gurus, masters, or teachers, and are not looking for students. They are simply practitioners sharing their interpretation of the practice. Every night we have different classes led by different people from various Buddhist traditions. We have a recovery sangha that meets several times a week for anyone with addiction, and our food redistribution program is every Thursday at 5 p.m. We have classes and programs every day, and everything we offer here is always free. The full schedule is on our website and also posted in the entryway above the shoe rack. We have a lending library. If you see a book you like, feel free to borrow it and bring it back whenever you are done with it. Please straighten your seat or cushion before you head out. If a few people could stay to close and latch the windows, that would be helpful. Thank you for being here. We wish you well and hope to see you all again.
Thanks, John. Thank you all. Have a good night.